Good afternoon. Technically, it's morning, but let's be honest. If you were going to Chick-fil-A right now, you'll be getting a chicken sandwich, not a chicken biscuit. So we're going to say good afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Ryan Jenkins on the Crown by Nichelle podcast. We are now live on Facebook and Instagram, and technically we are live on TikTok, even though all y'all can do is see my beautiful face. Y'all can't see my awesome guests today, but and I know some of you like, Ryan, you normally are not on during this time. I told y'all I accommodate my guests, so whenever my guests can log on, that's when I'm logging on. I don't have a set time because I'm trying to get the dopest people in here that I can. So welcome to the Crown by Nichelle podcast, where we talk about everything. So if you want to go back and watch my previous podcasts, they're always on YouTube. You can also listen to them on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Podcast Index. You see from season 1 to now season 2. We are on episode 10. This is hard to believe. Granted, I did 3 episodes in 1 week, but still, we're going to take it. So a few church announcements, some events I have coming up next week. Those of you in the Columbia area, and even if you don't live in the Columbia area, I need you to come out and visit your girl. If you've never been to Soda City in Columbia, South Carolina, I need you to come out once in your lifetime. Soda City is like the biggest borderline bougie flea market on Main Street. That's the best way I could describe it. Every type of food from every type of nation and country you can think of, from the flower shops to their farmers market is out there, to any from paintings to vintage clothes to pottery, anything you can think of is out there. So I'm going to be out there. I've been very blessed and fortunate that Liberation is Lit has allowed me to come to her table and sell my books. I will have a blessing for the world. I'm hoping to have copies of Reverse. Let's hope Ingram Spark will work with a sister and get them in here. So that's going to be next weekend on the 15th. Soda City, if I'm not mistaken, is on the flyer. I can read 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So come check me out. If you have not purchased a book, that's a perfect time to get one without having to pay shipping. All right. So again, the following books I have on sale right now is A Blessing for the World, which is my first children's book. Reverse, I am on pins and needles because Reverse will hopefully be here by tomorrow, the hard copy and the paperback. And if I'm fine with it, we're going to put those things on sale and enable distribution. Heaven's Jewel, I received some illustrations from my illustrator this week. I'm really excited. That is going to be my second children's book, which is a love letter to our beautiful Black girls. And that is that. And then the last weekend in March, our Richland Library, which is so dope, is having what is called a Read Freely Fest. You're probably seeing this all over social media. When I was coming down I-20 from church one night, I saw it on the billboard, the electronic billboard, but it's called Read Freely Fest. It's going to feature a lot of authors who are from here in South Carolina, who are nationally, internationally acclaimed. They will have what is called an indie author corner, where you will meet independent authors like myself and a few others. I found out some other author friends are going to be there with me. You'll be able to purchase books from us and talk with us. I want to say they're going to have like a concert, like on the 28th. They've had this before. I'm still learning. So definitely check it out. Go to Richland Library to get more information about it. It's going to be a dope event. So it's from March 28th to the 30th. I'll admit my table will only be set up on the 29th and the 30th. But if I'm not mistaken, the musical event is also going to be on the 28th. The last time they have one, y'all, you do not want to miss it. They have artists like Tiffany J, Katera, there's another artist, I cannot remember her name. She was pretty dope. So definitely tune into that. And then also on the 29th, I am going to be featured in a performance. It's called The Jam Sessions, the 5th year anniversary at the House of Hawthorne. I'm really excited about the amount of ladies that will be on the show. This is a salute to Jam Session and that platform, but also Women's History Month. So come out and support. It starts at 7 o'clock, $10 if you bring cash to the door, $13 if you pay with Cash App. But it's a dope, awesome opportunity that I greatly appreciate you coming to join me. So I'm going back and forth between Instagram to see. I see we have some viewers here, so I greatly appreciate you tuning in. So our guest speaker Our guest, that's a guest speaker. Our guest today is an awesome author who I actually reached out to her. If I come across authors on my Instagram, I immediately inbox them or email them. I would love for you to donate towards my All Black Author Book Drive. For those who don't know, I do an All Black Author Book Drive and giveaway where I collect books by all Black authors, and I go to different community events and distribute these books. I wish y'all could see the looks on their faces when the kids and the parents realize the books are free. I'm like, yeah, it's yours. Take it home, read it. So it's a very exciting time. So not only did she donate books towards the book drive, but she also was willing to come on the podcast. And I greatly appreciate you, Janae, coming on today. So all I know is that she is a dope, awesome author. The first book that I read for her, and what's so crazy is her book was on my shelf. I'm a sucker for, if I love the cover, I just buy it. I don't have to read the back. I don't have to read the summary. So I will, and I bought it. And I remember when she donated the books, I said, let me read these books and see what they're all about. Because I have a long list of books I need to read. The Desk from Zoe Washington. Oh my gosh. But before we even get into that, is there anything else you want the crew to know about you, where you're from, anything of that nature?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. The work you're doing is awesome, and you seem very booked and busy. So I appreciate you taking the time to even have me on. So yeah, no, I mean, I live in Connecticut. I'm from New York originally, and yeah, I mean, we can just dive right in, I guess. Yeah.
So there was obviously a purpose and an intention when you wrote The Desk from Zoe Washington. Like, yeah. Yes. So if you have not read this, I need you to read this. It is she's turning 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And then when she comes home from her birthday party, she sees a letter from her father. Not only is it a letter from her father who's incarcerated, she finds out that her father has been writing letters all this time and she has not received them. Mom is adamant that she doesn't want her to have contact with the father. So it's so many things that come out of the storyline. So my question to you was there an ultimate purpose for writing this book, or was it something that the purpose came out as you were writing it?
I think it kind of, it's maybe a little bit of both. I was actually first inspired from listening to a podcast. I don't know if like a decade ago you ever listened to the podcast Serial. The first season of that, which is about like 10 years old now, told the story of a man who was incarcerated for a crime that a lot of people believed he didn't actually commit. So it was very much like a true crime, podcast. Every episode, they're kind of digging into the case and poking holes in how it was handled. And, it just kind of got me thinking about wrongful convictions and just made me want to kind of explore that. And I wasn't sure if I could do that for a younger audience. But then I started to think, because I like writing for kids, what if it was a story that featured this kind of dynamic, but from the perspective of the child? How would that impact their relationship? How would that impact her if she found out that he might actually be innocent? And then it can turn into somewhat of a mystery. So it was sort of that, wanting to tell a story about a wrongful conviction, a possible wrongful conviction case that kind of got me started with the book. And then as I was trying to figure out, how else to create the rest of the details, that's kind of how the rest of the story, it kind of came out as I went from there. But that was the first inspiration for it.
So it was, y'all, you need to read it. And what's so crazy about it is the mom is adamant that he did what he was convicted of doing. And then Zoe is battling because everything she's heard about her father is from her mother. So when he's saying the opposite, she really has to, can I believe him? And then she also, and I don't know if you did this indirectly or directly, but just this negative perception people have of anyone that is incarcerated, whether it is falsely or whether they did own up to what they're doing, which I felt like you opened up that more in the second book. Because I remember, not trying to give the second book away, but what I loved about it was when Zoe and her father are trying to launch the food truck, and he was saying how he wants to hire people who had just been released from prison. And her thing was, well, they've been falsely in prison, that's fine. That means they didn't do anything. But if they did something wrong, she felt some type of way about that. So was that something again where was that an intentional thing where you were trying to basically get people to understand at the end of the day, these are still people?
Yeah, no, I think that was pretty intentional. I think, as I was writing and about or researching too about what it's like to be incarcerated, whether you are wrongfully convicted or not, and then obviously like for book 2, what it's like when you're outside of prison, like that was a big, common thing that I read about, like how, people will be judgmental and, and you just never know like what led somebody to do the things they did, even if they were guilty. So I just feel like, I think there is like part of me that wanted to kind of open up the conversation about, is somebody inherently a bad person just because they committed a crime, even if they actually did commit that crime. And, obviously this is a book for younger readers, so we don't get too heavy about it, but yeah, just to kind of, just open up that conversation. Not everybody, people make mistakes, people can, the justice system can sometimes change people, and make them change their minds, make them want to do better. I think that's probably the more important thing to look at versus what they did in the first place. Like, did they actually come out of this experience better? Are they going to make better choices? So yeah, I think it was kind of intentional as I was, especially in the second book, but even in the first one, I think just her being really hesitant with her dad, was something that I was like, I think that's what makes sense. I mean, if you're a kid, you're kind of told like, oh, like people in prison are bad. Like you just don't even realize that there are people in prison that could actually be innocent. Like it's not something that you necessarily know about until you're finally exposed to that later in life when you're older. So yeah, I think just opening that conversation to, just because somebody's in prison right now, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person necessarily. There could be all kinds of reasons why they're there. And even if they did commit a crime, like it doesn't mean that they're inherently a monster,
I love that. So I just realized I totally skipped ahead. One of my first questions I love to ask authors: when did you realize writing is your thing? Like this you're called to do this. This is your jam.
So I think a lot of writers will say, oh, especially writers of kids' books will say, oh, it was when I was a kid myself. But that is not actually the case for me. I liked reading and writing as a kid for fun, but it wasn't really until I went to college. I knew I wanted to do something with books. So I was an English major in college. I thought maybe I might work somewhere in the publishing industry or do something, maybe become a librarian, something with books. I knew. So I wanted to study literature in college. But then I started taking creative writing classes. And that's when I was like, oh, you know what? I like this side of it too. Maybe I'll try to, see if I can maybe write a book of my own one day. And in college, the creative writing classes I took were all short story writing. So I didn't know how to write a full length book. So I ended up actually going back to school and getting a master's in creative writing after that. So that was just because I felt like I didn't even know where the first place to begin. And I was still young. I felt like graduate school was kind of something I had been thinking about anyway. So I was like, might as well. And so that was kind of how I kind of got more in. That's kind of really when I got started for real, was during that program, just starting to really write a book. But it still took many more years before I finally got published. I graduated from that program in 2010, and my first book did not come out till 2020. So during that 10 years, it was a lot of writing different books, sending them out, like receiving lots of rejections, until finally From the Desk of Zoe Washington was picked up. So it was still quite a journey.
And just to help some people out there who are not familiar with the publishing process, because some people don't know, those of you watching this for the first time, I'm a self-published author. You're with the publishing house. So with that process, you first had to seek out a literary agent, right?
Yeah. So that was the first step for me. And that's the part that took the longest, because my first book that I wrote, during that graduate program, and, I sent that one out when I thought it was ready, and a whole bunch of different literary agents, and ended up getting rejections over time, and ended up having to put that book aside. I wrote 2 other books that also didn't go anywhere until I finally wrote Zoe Washington. So it was just many, many years of just writing different things, working on them, sending them out to agents, it not working out until finally with Zoe, it did work out. I got, I was able to get an agent. And then from there, once you get a literary agent, they're the ones who will send your book to the publishers, because if you do want to be published by a publisher, often they really won't accept work unless it's sent by the agent. So that's kind of like, once you get the agent, it's just not that necessarily it's easier, but it's just you have that person now who can help you get to the next level.
A level of advocacy there and another agency. So my question to you is, I'm thinking about Nick Stone, because Nick Stone admitted Dear Martin was not her first book that she wrote, but I want to say Chaos Theory. which she released later.
Yeah.
So would you ever try to reintroduce those books that were not accepted by those literacy
I
agents?
think for me, I don't think I will, because I now can look back and see what was wrong with them. And I think I've just grown now since then. I can see, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, actually in my newest book, A Split Second, I did take, like, the main character in one of the earlier books that I wrote had an interest in photography, and there's a photography class in that book. So, sometimes I might like steal something from a previous thing that I've written, but I don't think I'll take that exact story and revisit it. I think in my case, I do hear stories like that though, where authors will, if their first book doesn't get a book deal, their second or third might be able to use those books later on and get them published. So there's always hope. But for me personally, I don't feel that connected to those stories anymore. So I'm probably going to move on from them. Yeah.
Got you. So my next question is with A Soft Place to Land, which I was sharing with you prior to the podcast. Definitely pulled at my heartstrings. So A Soft Place to Land. Oh my gosh. So remind me the main character's name.
Joy. Her name's Joy.
Joy. So Joy is going through a big transition because financially parents are going through. Dad lost his job, so they had to sell the house. This is the only house that she has known. So she feels some type of way. So I go from having my own bedroom, my own space, and now I have to share a space with my little sister, who is a little bit aggravating if she's being honest. And then I'm in this apartment where there's a park here and there, but I have to pretty much go to a new school, make new friends. But what I told her, where it pulled at my heartstrings, Joy is 12 years old, and Joy can feel and sense the stress that her parents are going through. At one point in time in the book, the father does move out the house just to give him and his wife some space to figure out what's going on and to figure this thing out, which devastates Joy and her sister. But prior to that, just the tension. So where did that idea come from, A Soft Place to Land?
So this one, unlike with Zoe, where I was inspired by something, that I didn't have personal experience with, but wanted to learn more about, A Soft Place to Land is much more of a personal story. My situation was different, but I did go through something similar as her. When I was in high school, my parents separated. And we ended up selling the house that I'd grown up in. So I was older than her. I was more like 16. But we had to move out of that house, and it was also the only house that I'd ever known. And I moved with my mom into an apartment. So in some ways, like, I had it a little bit easier because I still went to the same high school. I didn't have to make all new friends, but I was all of a sudden in this new home. I really was just, it felt like all this stuff just happened very quickly, and it was out of my control, similar to with Joy. And so I don't know, I think it's just one of those moments when I look back in my childhood that, like, things started to feel hard. Everything was great up until that moment, and I didn't even see it coming. I think with A Soft Place to Land and Joy, like, she's able to sense some of the tension between the parents before things get, a little bit worse. In my case, my parents were actually really good at hiding all the things. So I didn't know any of this was going on. So it felt like a bomb had been dropped on me when all of a sudden everything had to change. And so, yeah, I think it was one of those moments from my life that I felt like I wanted to explore a bit more. And I think that's just another great thing about fiction, is you can take something of your own, and I still made up the rest of Joy's story, but a lot of how I felt about it, was able to come through in her. I was able to kind of put a lot of myself into her emotions and how she navigates these changes.
And what I like about it, despite the craziness that was going on in her home, because some kids, when they move, they don't always have the best transition as far as like meeting friends. So immediately the friend she met was very friendly. Even the neighbors, like, I love how you built a sense of community amongst each other, how everyone knew each other, how everyone looked out for each other, even to the secret spot that the teenagers had, or the preteens had in the apartment. So one thing, I wonder, do you feel like that is somewhat lost within our community? That's like the village.
Yeah, I definitely do, because that was not my experience at all in the building that I moved to. Not only that, but there was like tension with a neighbor at one point. Like, it was nothing like that. So I feel like I wish that it had been more like that. I think it was kind of wishful thinking. I think that exists at some places, but yeah, I think we really have lost that sense of, getting to know your neighbors better. I think everybody just kind of wants to be in their own little bubbles these days. I think the pandemic probably made it worse. Yeah, I feel like we kind of have lost a lot of that. And I think we could definitely benefit by being more community oriented, especially today with everything going on. So, yeah.
Because I definitely picked up on that. And because I'm even realizing now with myself, granted, I've been in this house 3 years and I'm now really into the place where I'm really talking to my neighbors, but I realize I have to go outside.
It's not comfortable. It's really uncomfortable. Like, I'm an introvert. Like, I'm an introverted person. So the odds of me like just knocking on somebody's door just because they live next to me is very small. Like, it's just, it's like, that's just not my comfort level. But I feel like that's just, it gets worse because it's not, other people aren't doing it either. And so it just gets so easy to be like, okay, not going out of your comfort zone to do those kinds of things.
So for me, it was just simply as when I would go out and walk or just go into my mailbox sometimes, my neighbors, like they have younger kids.
Yeah.
So they're outside, so they'll speak. And I finally figured out, I've been living in this house almost 4 years. I would have a neighbor who during Christmas time would always drop off cookies. But I didn't think that, I just assumed who I thought it was. So finally I said, well, let me just go think who I think it is, and kind of find out it wasn't who I thought it was. But we ended up having a conversation. They're like, no, it was the neighbors over there. So it was just like just getting outside of your home and just learning to communicate. And that's a lesson for any of us. It's just go out, just walk outside in nature and you'll meet someone. So now, one thing you say, and I want to make sure that authors who are on here or are going to listen to this in the replay, if you're watching this in the replay at another time, please hashtag replay in the comments. You are very intentional about your research. Why is that so important for authors and writers when you talk about having an authentic voice?
Yeah, well, I think especially when you're writing about real issues that kids are experiencing, I think you just want to do your best to handle these topics in a authentic and also sensitive way. So, like I said, I did not grow up with an incarcerated parent. So I just tried my best to really just make sure that I wasn't doing anything offensive in the way that I was, portraying this relationship. And I even had somebody that I know I ended up meeting that like had an incarcerated parent read through it just to say, like, just make sure that I didn't do anything wrong. There was actually an interesting point. So my publisher had I think she's like she might be like a professor of criminal justice or something like that. Do like a quick educator guide on like a HarperCollins like website. And it was all about like using the Zoe Washington book to talk about criminal justice with kids. And one of the points she made actually was really interesting. She said the one thing that she didn't like about Zoe was how she kept referring to her dad as her convict father, like referring to him by his status, like in the prison system, and like how you shouldn't do that. Like in the real world, you shouldn't say like, oh, like he's a convict. They're people first and they happen to be imprisoned, right? So like, and that was something that I didn't think about at all when I was writing the book, but I think it kind of worked because obviously she wouldn't have thought about that. So that's the language she's going to use. But I was much more intentional about the language she used in the second book because I felt like by that point, she would have learned like, yes, like that is not all that he is as a person. That is not his whole identity. Like he is my dad who happened to have gone to prison, not my, convict dad. So yeah. So I think like those kinds of things, those nuances, you don't necessarily know unless you do the research. And sometimes if you fail to do the research, it might be pointed out to you and you'll be like, oh, I wish I'd known, So yeah, I think it's just super important. When writing about realistic topics, especially tough ones that kids are going through, sensitive topics that might trigger them. You just don't want to isolate your readers. You want to bring them in. And it's like the best way to do that is to be really careful about how you address these topics and make sure they're well researched.
Yeah. And that's what, and then one thing also to note is for those of you who have not read the book yet, Zoe has never, until that 12th birthday, she didn't have any contact with her father.
Yeah.
And really before that time also, her father to her was her stepfather. That was who she called dad. Like for a long time in the book, she didn't call her biological dad. She called him Marcus. Yeah. So it was like one of those things where there's a lot of things she had to learn and a lot of stereotypes and misjudgments she had to break down eventually. And that's why I love the role of her grandmother, because the fact that she was able, because she knew her mom was adamant and was not going to be moved, But I love how she did have someone that she could be open with and let them know this is what's happening. And the fact that the grandmother was willing to allow her to, at one point, Zoe starts writing letters back and forth to her father, and the grandmother said, I'll let you mail the letters from my house and we'll go from there. One thing that I admire also about Zoe, that I think that's why any child that I think even as young as 8 and 9 can read these books, her level of determination, like when she is set on something, she is going to make it happen. So basically, in the midst of writing these letters to her father, her father admits, I never did commit these things, but he's content with this is what it is. And she was like, no, we're not. Well, no, we need to find. So she ends up becoming like an investigator herself, trying to get evidence. And mind you, she is 12, y'all. She is 12. So I admire that. And again, I hate that I keep asking, was that intentional? But again, was that also like her gumption? She wouldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think once I came up with the idea that she was gonna find out that her dad may not have actually committed the crime, I had to think, what would a character do? Depending on their personality, they would do all kinds of different things. But I wanted her to be the kind of kid who is like, I want answers, and I'm going to do what I can. So that kind of did inform like the kind of character I wanted her to be, the kind of story that I wanted this to be. Like I wanted her to be somebody who might actually be able to figure it out. And so yeah, I think a lot of her traits are not traits that if it was me in this situation, I'm not. I would have been. I'm like such a rule follower. Like I would have immediately told my mom. Like I just feel like there's a lot of things that she does that I just was, that's the kind of kid she is. So it's like I admire her in some ways, but that's not the kind of kid that I was. But yeah, I think it required, if it was ever going to happen, if her dad was ever going to be, if she was ever going to find out the truth, she had to be that kind of character to like kind of really want to, not feel like people, even her grandma or other people would say like, oh, but you're just a kid. She's like, no, like I can figure this out, like
like yeah, that was yeah. And her grandmother has spunk about her.
And and the reason why I added the grandmother is because I'm a parent too. Like I think there's part of me that's like, she can't be doing this without any sort of parental guidance. Like it just makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know. I was like, she needs to have at least one trusted adult who knows what she's up to keep her safe. So that's why I was like, let me have the grandmother be more involved and make me feel a bit better. And I think, I think it makes more sense for her. And she also is able to ask her grandmother questions like about what's going on. She doesn't really understand how this could have happened if he's actually innocent. And her grandmother is able to provide that background and insight.
And I think that's such a blessing. Like one of the things I loved about being a teacher, being a mentor, is knowing that that child had someone they can talk to. They didn't feel like they can talk to their parents. But I will let my kids know, if you say something, I think your parents need to know. I have to say what I have to say, which does eventually happen.
I think at some point she's like, okay, I shouldn't really be keeping this from her child, her daughter, Zoe's mom.
And if we're honest, growing up, we had, if we couldn't go to our mom about, we had someone, whether it was an older sister or older cousin who was like an aunt, like someone, maybe the cool aunt that we could go to and say, well, I'm dealing with this and how can I navigate this? So that was pretty cool how you incorporate that in the comments. I went back to Instagram and we have Tanisha, and I hope I'm saying your name right. She was saying how grandparents are so special. And she commented that research is everything. And which and that was one of the reasons why, like, even with, there's a potential book I want to write, but I realized the timeline I was giving myself, I was like, it's no way, because I need to really do research and make sure this is actually what would be said and what needs to be done. Matter of fact, there's a play I want to write and I just need to finish it. But I felt like before I write this play, I need to read something by Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, just read something they have written to make sure that that's not, I'm not saying something they wouldn't say, if that makes sense. So it's very important that, sometimes as authors, we so badly want to put something out there, not realizing that, as I used to teach my students, you have holes in it and the reader doesn't understand what's going on. And then you're also not painting. There's some things, there's certain things your reader needs to know. And if you don't do the ample research, they're going to miss things. And also the voice is not going to come out authentic if you're not careful about that.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to your process. So when you go to write a book, like how is it birthed and where, like, do you do an outline? Do you sketch out your characters first? Like what is your process, and does it change with each book?
I've kind of fallen into now a rhythm of a process. When I started out, I was kind of experimenting with writing an outline for one of the earlier books, trying not to use an outline and just writing as I go. But now I've realized I really do like having an outline. I do like having somewhat of a plan, even if it's not super in depth. I at least like want to know, beginning, middle, and end, and just kind of like what's kind of happening. So I do try to make a basic outline for each book before I start writing it. I don't always plan out a ton about the characters ahead of time. A lot of that, I think it's easier for me to figure it out a little bit as I go and then have to revise and just like fine tune those characters. So for like Zoe, for example, I might have known that I wanted her to be kind of, a go-getter, but I think a lot of the other nuances of her character like definitely had to come out through revision. I don't always get that dynamic right on the first go, but yeah, so I might have a general sense, okay, I want this character to be somewhat of a go-getter, but that's all I know, and then I'll just start writing and then I'll figure out more about their character and have to weave more in later. So yeah, so that's kind of what it is, and then I just rely heavily on edits that I get from my editor to kind of know how to make the story better once the first draft is done.
So when you spoke of your editor, that made me come up with another question. Was there ever a time where you felt like you had to fight to keep something, like the editor was like, "No, you don't need this," and you're like, "No, I want to keep it." And did you fight to keep it, or did you just trust your editor? Like, are there moments like that?
Yeah, so far I've actually been, I think it's pretty fortunate that I've really agreed with all of the comments and notes that my editor has given me. If there was, I don't think there's ever been a time when they were like, you need to take this entire thing out, unless I, or if they did say something like that, I think it was very clear to me, like, no, I see what you're saying, like, let's fix that. But no, I think I have heard of other authors being in that position where their editor wants them to cut something, but they feel strongly. And I think usually at the end of the day, your editor should defer to you, the writer. At the end of the day, like these are meant to be, the edits they give you are meant to be suggestions. They obviously want you to make the book as best as it can, but you as the author should have the final say. So like, I would hope that if that ever happened, I would be able to kind of explain like, no, this is why I want it to be this way. But yeah, so far nobody's pushed hard on me to change something that I didn't want to change, or yeah. So I've been fortunate so far, but I'm sure it'll happen one of these days.
Okay. So I was just flipping the feedback. She said we have feedback. I don't know what's going on with the sound. I know I have my mic. And it may be me, and I don't know, maybe I should just mute when you're talking, but I'm still trying to figure this thing out.
Okay, well, I can also try muting in between if you want to try that.
No, let's just roll with it for right now, and we'll go from there. So please tell us about your latest release.
Okay, so this new one is A Split Second, which just came out this past October. And this one is a little bit of a departure from my other books. You can maybe tell from the cover that it has something else going on. This one has a little bit of like light fantasy elements, unlike my other books, which have all been realistic fiction. So this one tells a story of another 12-year-old. I tend to write about 12-year-olds a lot. 12-year-old Elise, she's the one in the white shirt. She's just had a really great day in the very beginning of the story. Really great day with her two best friends. After they've gone to the fall carnival, they are now having a sleepover in her basement. She's just really enjoying life with these two friends of hers. But when she wakes up the next morning, somehow it is unexpectedly 6 months in the future. And she has no idea whether she lost her memory or whether she has amnesia. She doesn't know what's going on. Her friends are nowhere to be found. When she goes to school to kind of find her friends to be like, hey, did this happen to you too? Like, what's going on? They are no longer talking to her. They want nothing to do with her. So not only has she lost her memory or whatever this time, a chunk of time, but she's also lost her two best friends. So the rest of the story is basically her trying to figure out what happened. And Elise is that's Elise. Cora is the one in the yellow. She comes in pretty early on because while Elise is no longer friends with her two best friends, somehow she's friends with Cora again. And she hasn't been friends with Cora since they were in elementary school together. And they grew apart. So she's like, well, why are we all of a sudden friends again? So much has changed in this 6 months period that she wants to figure it out. And Cora ends up kind of helping her through this. Like they kind of join together to help figure it out together. And so this is a story that also has a lot of friendship themes, as well as, the mystery of whether or not magic caused this time jump, which you might be guessed based on the cover then maybe it does have something to do with it. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like now I really don't want to wait to read it because that is so super dope. This actually, and I'm mad I couldn't remember the title, but if I remember it, I'll post it whenever. But this reminds me of another novel. But it wasn't like she woke up. She actually had an accident.
Okay.
That caused her to lose her memory. It's a YA novel. I know she's like 16, 17 years old. And the whole book, the boyfriend is trying to get her to remember who they were together.
Yeah.
And she can't. And she's
was that the one by Justin A. Reynolds, maybe?
No,
not that one. Because he has one that has to do with like time too, a YA. I don't know. Anyway.
So that because I can see it on my bookshelf right now.
Yeah.
So, but I remember reading it and it was, yeah, that is super dope. Like I love that. So that brings me to another question. All of your books are 12 years old. So what made you intentionally, because you have certain authors, they write all over the place. And you like, I noticed like Jason Reynolds has your children's and your middle grades and your YA books. Nick Stone is kind of the same way too. So I know all yours are for middle grades. What was your reason for wanting to write for that age group?
The 3 books that I actually wrote that before I was published that didn't end up getting published were actually YA. And I think looking back that might have had something to do with why they weren't published. Once I wrote Zoe Washington and realized it was meant to be middle grade, I think my voice, just my storytelling voice just maybe fits more for that age group. Not sure, but yeah, I kind of fell into writing middle grade because Zoe Washington came to me and it kind of lent itself to being a middle grade story. And then I kind of just kept going. So I'm definitely not opposed to writing for other age groups. I just haven't done that yet, like published any other ones yet. But yeah, I'm open to it. And I think it's cool when authors can have books for all different age groups. So and as for age 12, I don't know. I think middle grade characters are usually somewhere between like 5th, 6th, or 7th grade. And I don't know. I kind of just like that sweet spot of like being in the middle of middle school. You're not the youngest. You're not the oldest. Like, I don't know. I think something about 7th grade is kind of, I feel like it stuck with me, that age group. But again, I might, stray from that. And in the second Zoe book, she actually is 14. So she's going into high school soon. So that was kind of interesting to play on, like, what are the things she'd be thinking about as a rising freshman, as opposed to a 7th grader.
And speaking of the second book, I just thought about something when you just brought that up. The dynamic between, I really thought Zoe and what was her best friend, the male
Trevor.
I thought they were going to become an item. So
that's funny because I would go to school visits and kids were like thinking that too. That might happen too. It's funny.
So I like how you flipped that, and he ended up having a crush on her best friend, which sort of kind of was his best friend too.
Yeah,
all hanging together. But I loved how you navigated that space. I don't want to give it away because I want people to read to find out what happens between the 3 of them. But the jealousy and the way she kind of feels like it was I like the honesty that was displayed there, because she genuinely did not want them to like each other because she didn't want to be iced out. She didn't want to be.
And I think that kind of came from, because I remember what it was like to be in middle school and having your friends. I mean, I wasn't in the exact same situation where it was 2 of my friends wanting to get together, but just in general, having your friends start to care more about boys than your girl friendships, like that shift where they start to care more about that. And you're like, well, what about us? Like, what about our thing? Just being friends and hanging out. And I was a little bit of a late bloomer, because I distinctly remember like being in middle school and being annoyed that my friends were caring about boys instead of like us doing our thing like usual. And it was hard to deal with, because I think I just kind of wanted to touch upon that, because I know there are other kids out there who can relate.
Yes, definitely. And just like, I'll never forget, it was one scene. There were several scenes where she would find out afterwards that they were doing something. And she was like, would she have called me if I hadn't called her? And, it's like the questions that she was going through internally. Like, again, I really do recommend, if you have a child, again, I would say even as young as 8 or 9, and just having that conversation with them parents. I strongly recommend. I think we need to have more parents read books with their kids and have those conversations with them, because it was definitely an eye opener. Because I, beknownst to some people with teaching, and I'm a former teacher, 20 years. what trips me out is you have those different teachers who they definitely love certain grade levels, and or they can teach all of them. And I definitely know that middle school was my jam. So I did 1 year in high school and knew by day 3, this is not it. This is not my life. I'm willing to go back to middle school. And of course, God had other plans where I came out of the classroom, but I definitely loved being in that space and just watching them with their friends. And what was the weird thing to me with the kids is we had particular friend groups who they all went out with each other. Like everyone, kind of like how on All American, the TV show, they would call it the Vortex, and like everyone dated someone in the group.
Yeah,
and it was so weird. So so that was definitely a very transparent moment that I definitely appreciated. So
well, I agree with you. I agree with you about parents reading books with their kids because it's just such an easy way to bring up some of these topics without it having to be exactly about them. Like you see the examples in the book, and it's a way for you to say, hey, you know, this is not about you, but we're talking about what would happen if like this scenario happened, you know, so you're getting to give them advice, and maybe your kids would be a little bit more attuned to it because you're not really talking about them, you're talking about the character. So it's a little bit of a distance, but you're still able to have those conversations about dynamics between relationships, and especially at this age group where they're going through puberty and things are happening. And I think, I think it's just a good way for parents to open up conversation without it feeling so awkward, because you could talk about it through the lens of these fictional characters.
And I was just about to say that some of them go through this very awkward stage where it is uncomfortable for them to talk to you about certain things. And that's why I and maybe your child is not necessarily reading novels, but you know they're into anime.
Right.
Maybe sit down and watch an anime episode, depending on which anime it is. I learned through my son, not all of them are made for kids. So, but nevertheless, like sit down with them and then have a discussion about something that they actually like. Like even with playing video games, actually go in there. Like I would do that every now and again with my son. Now, I think it was very ironic that his games are always a one player person. Like it couldn't be two. I was like, I feel like that was your way of not letting me play. But I digress. So, but just finding ways to get into their space, to talk to them, but definitely finding books. And what I love, and I was sharing with her prior to the podcast, is that I don't remember the amount of literature written not only by us, about us, and then the different variety of topics that's out there to one particular book. And I'm mad the topic is eluding me, but it was like, I have to save the world, but in my swimming trunks.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Like the crazy adventures that sadly we don't see us always on TV as. I mean, it's getting better, but to me, it could be a whole lot better. But just the wild adventures, like you would see the crazy babysitter adventures and whatnot, but it was mainly white characters for us in the 80s.
Yeah, or like the fantasies, like all these
big
fantasies now featuring Black kids is really cool to see.
It's really cool. And it's like the fact that there can be witches that are Black. There can be someone who can come up with this potion, and just it's an array of books out there to read with your kids, and a great place to start. And I was sharing with her that I definitely do, and she says her daughter does too. She's in 4th grade, is reading audiobooks. And I'm pretty sure, I know with Richland Library here, but I think any library in any county, you have access to free.
We borrow free library audiobooks all the time for my daughter and even myself. Yeah.
Now, if you want to pay for audio, I think it's called Audible. You can, but I think Audible is a jip, because you can't borrow but so many books at a time.
Yeah, I there's Libby is one of the free library ones, and there's Hoopla, which is another free library one. And between those two, you're gonna find so many options without having to pay for them. And authors still benefit from the library. Like I always encourage people to go to the library for my books. You know, we still benefit. We love libraries are so important. So,
and I would definitely also check in with libraries to your local library, because of not just the story time for the young kids, they also bring in other authors for other age groups.
Yeah.
Where you can have author chats and have discussions. I know some groups even have different from learning how to sew to anime groups to drawing. It's so much that the library offers that can also open up along with reading that you definitely want to take heart in. So definitely, if you don't already have a library card, I would get one. Even to business services, I'm as an entrepreneur, there's sometimes I've gone there and had some things done and got some information that I needed. But it's so much that the local library gives you. But definitely, if you have a child that's what I call a reluctant reader, get what is called, it's Libby and then Hoopla. If you have a library card, you sign up with your library card and you have access to so many things from ebooks to audiobooks. And I do like having both of them because I notice sometimes Libby will have the book and Hoopla won't.
Yeah. I go back and forth depending on they don't always have the same list, but between the two, you can get a lot.
All right. So what is next? Like, do you have a book brewing or you have future projects, that's coming out that you can talk about?
Yeah. So I do have another book coming out in the fall of 2026. That's next year. And so I'm still working on it, but basically it's as of right now, it's called Starting Now. That might change. But it's about another 12-year-old. That's kind of my go-to now, who it kind of gets back to a little bit of the stuff that's happening in Zoe and maybe A Soft Place to Land, where there's a lot of family stuff going on as well as friendship stuff. So it's about a girl who her mother, who is a single mom, had a bad car accident and has to be in the hospital for a few months to recover from a brain injury. She's going to be fine, but like she just has to recover, not at home. And so in this interim time, her half brother, who also they share a mom, but he's been kind of like, he hasn't been around. He's been raised by his dad. So her kind of estranged half brother steps in to kind of be her temporary guardian. So he's 25, she's 12. And so at first it's just kind of about like the misadventures of like this, young adult taking care of this young tween. And, how does that work? They don't really know each other that well, but, and she's still grieving. Her mom's sick and, whatever. But then as she spends more time with him and gets to know him, like they do start to bond. But there's tension because she knows that he does not really want to talk about their mom. He doesn't want to visit their mom in the hospital when she goes to visit him. And she's like, well, what happened? Like, I don't get it. Like, what could have happened? Like, my mom's great. Like, I don't get it. And so she really wants to figure out what is this kind of like moment that caused this rift between them. And she ends up kind of discovering this family secret. So that's kind of where the mystery comes in. But it's ultimately, again, like a very much a family relationship story about the relationship between these siblings who get the chance to be around each other and get to know each other for the first time.
I love that. I love that dynamic. Like, and that's a dynamic, and maybe that has happened in certain books and novels and whatnot, but just to see that, because I'm seeing that more now, where you have definitely teaching middle school kids, you would see them where they were the oldest, they were 12, 13, but then they have this 1-year-old and this 2-year-old.
Right. Sister. Yeah. Like where you're significantly older or
younger. Yeah. So, and then eventually they're going to get older. So what that dynamic is like, if something was to happen to the mom or the dad, that is pretty dope. I love that. So it is, I don't know where else to go from here, but again, I just realized I never did put up your stuff. So my bad. So if you want to connect with Janae Marks, please go to her website. It is JanaeMarks.com. You can also follow her on Instagram and TikTok, Janae Marks Books. Please follow her and learn more about her journey and her books. And again, if you have not read it, you need to read it. Even though her characters are female, I feel like males can read her books also. But definitely one book I would strongly suggest is with A Soft Place to Land. If you are a family who is dealing with divorce or dealing with family drama or family tension, it's a lot of fighting, I need you to read that book. And I want you and your children to read that book. And I want y'all to come together and have a discussion. And what I shared in the podcast earlier, when I shared with her prior to the podcast, is I don't think we understand how much our children internalize and carry what we're dealing with in harnessing the tension and the animosity, even if you're not even in the home together, but you and your maybe your son's father or your son's, y'all are always arguing in front of the kids how they feel about this. I need you to read this book. And A Soft Place to Land is, at the end of the day, we want our kids to feel safe in the home. And it was sad that for a period of time, she did not feel, she felt like she had to get out. Like she felt like the walls are closing in because I like how you said earlier that she knew the tension that was going on between her parents. But with her sister, it was always, it's going to be okay. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it. And then, so she was trying to keep it together for her sister. So to carry that as a 12-year-old, that's a lot. That's a lot. So, and then again, from the Desk of Zoe Washington, and then the sequel to the book, and I'm not,
That
the,
one's on air with Zoe Washington.
on air with Zoe Washington, definitely dealing with a young lady who, again, she comes into contact with her father. After 12 years, she discovers her, number one, her father wants to be in contact with her and have a relationship with her, and having this to deal with that dynamic, but also helping us understand the wrongfully convicted, but also dealing with people who, yeah, they did do some wrong things, and how we should be regarding them and not just casting them away forever, like they could never do any good ever. I love how she paints that narrative in the second book. So you can find her books everywhere. Make sure you get them. Again, if you're watching this in the replay, definitely hashtag replay, share this with your people. As far as how long this podcast will be up, I will keep it on Instagram and Facebook up for 24 hours, and then I will take it down, and then I will post the YouTube link hopefully within the next week or so, because I don't plan on booking any podcast people for another maybe 2 weeks. So I will be reposting even from season 1. And again, for those of you on TikTok, you can find Janae Marks, JanaeMarks.com, and Janae is AE at the end, Marks. And then her Instagram and TikTok is Janae Marks Books. You can follow her and learn more about her story. I'm trying to think, make sure there's nothing else I need to tell y'all. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate y'all tuning in. I don't know when I'm going to have another episode, because again, I'm going through some schedule changes myself. So once I figure some things out, I will definitely if my schedule changed drastically the way I think it's going to, then this will probably be around the new time that I will do my podcast between 11 and 12. But I greatly appreciate y'all tuning in. Please know that you can definitely that you can always find my podcast on YouTube, and you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeart, Spotify, Podcast Index. Matter of fact, as soon as I log off from here, I'm going to download the audio and upload it. But definitely thank you for tuning in, and I will see y'all next time.
Thank you for having me again. Thanks.
Thank you for coming. This was an awesome discussion. I greatly appreciate it. So I'm in the stream.